What do you say when you're still thinking?
Especially in small talk situations. It can move fast and Americans can speak quickly. So what do you say when you still haven't thought about what you need to say?
Are you doing it right now?
Kind of. How can you sound more fluent? By thinking on your feet, thinking while you are speaking. We've got some tips for you.
What's up, guys, and welcome to Waiguo Friends English. We recently did a video where we were talking about some very redundant phrases that we use naturally when speaking, but they're not really acceptable in writing. And you can check out that video right there.
Some examples of this are like actual fact, absolutely necessary, exact same, time period, past history. Why do we say these redundant things? And part of it is because we're trying to think on our feet.
Sometimes these give us a little bit more time for us to be able to then respond more appropriately to whatever is happening in front of us. So when we use a phrase like first and foremost, that gives us actually a lot more time to think and form a response. How are the verbs going to be? Am I going to make a list? Am I going to give a personal example? Just by using and foremost.
And sometimes when we use phrases like, in my opinion, that are introductory and they're redundant, we use it kind of to let people know that they should tune in to hear what we're going to say, but also we use it as a way to see who all's going to listen. So in a way, it's also to think about, how do I want to form my response? So the human mind is amazing. We can think on our feet about forming a response, what we want to say, how we want to say it, and cater it to who's tuning in at the same time. So we might say, in my opinion, and we might pause for a second just to see who all's going to actually stop talking and pay attention to listen. And that will help us decide, okay, how do we really want to say it? It will help us make last minute decisions. So it's actually quite fascinating the way that we use these redundant phrases in fluent speaking and natural speaking in order to buy us a little bit of time just to make a few more lightning speed decisions on what to say next. And that's something that might be missing from your English.
So if you want a little bit more practice with, like we said, you can check out our previous video, but we want to keep going. The second way to think while speaking is just to slow down. So a lot of times when we're speaking, especially in another language, we think that we're talking a lot slower than we really are. If I spend a little bit of extra time and I slow down or I pause completely for a grand total of 2 seconds.
It's okay.
That feels like forever.
That was longer than 2 seconds.
That was longer than 2 seconds. But it feels like forever to us, but it doesn't actually feel that long to our listeners. So what we can do is we can actually use that pause, use that speed in order to give us a little bit more time to think on our feet and formulate a better response that we can then follow up, maybe even a little bit faster.
If you are from a culture that does not have a lot of small talk culture to it. I hear this from some students who come from cultures that are more cold climate cultures. They don't feel the need to fill the air with their words the way that Americans do. Americans do talk a lot. Generally speaking, we are uncomfortable with silence. If we stand in an elevator with one other stranger, we feel like we have to say something to them and start up this small talk. First of all, you don't actually have to participate in that if you don't want to. You can let the awkwardness continue. But what happens if they ask you or they talk to you? Yes, you could shut it down or you can totally ignore them. That's generally considered rude. But you've got to have something that you can give back. And sure, you can memorize some phrases or some questions, some small talk strategies. You can do that. And we do talk about this in Fluency Fast Track. We give you some ways to do that in our small talk course. But you can also just slow down. You don't have to talk as quickly as that American is speaking to you. Because, to be honest, some Americans really let it rip and they're not paying attention to whether you are from here or a foreigner who's learning English as a second language. They're not paying attention to that. They're just trying to fill the air because they feel uncomfortable with the silence. One of the things that you can do is slow down. You don't have to do as many ums or uhs or likes. You can slow down and think a little bit more thoughtfully about what you want to say. And that is okay. It is totally fine. Most Americans are pretty accepting of that. Now, if you take 5 minutes to respond to a question and you don't give any signal that you're thinking about it, you do want to answer, but you're going to take 5 minutes off to think about it. Okay, that might be a little too much. But Again, if you do 30 seconds or a minute, that's also a little much, but your mind may not need that long.
However, if you are taking a standardized test for speaking, a lot of times they give you 15 to 30 seconds to prepare for a 1-minute response. And actually, one of the grading scales that they use is how much you speak in your response.
How many words? They actually want you to put as much fluff in there as possible related to the context you just read or listened to. That is not how small talk works. If you are learning English by trying to take the TOEFL exam or the IELTS exam, that is not how we operate, generally speaking. But we do use a lot of fluff in small talk, but it's because fluff is safe. It is safe to talk about the weather. It is not safe to talk about politics. It's generally speaking. For this, even if you're talking about an easy, fluffy topic like the weather and how beautiful it is today versus politics and your stance on a particular hot topic, okay, you can still pause in both of those. You can still take that time to pause.
The third way to think while speaking is to kind of think in frameworks. So don't let your brain kind of waffle things out where there's walls and categories and you were talking about that, now you're talking about this, and now you're talking about that. Don't segment your thought process out. One way you can speak while thinking is to connect those topics together. So yes, you were just talking about weather in your small talk with a person in the elevator while trying not to feel awkward. But then you sense that the weather topic is kind of going down and you don't know what you're going to do at the end of the discussion. Well, what you could do is you could bring that topic out, but frame it in a new way by saying, hey, how is the weather going to affect your weekend plans? Or how is the weather going to affect your current workload or whatever that may be?
You can even make a reference to how the weather today is affecting what you're doing now. Okay, so if you're dripping wet from rain, you could say something like, I feel so bad bringing so much water into the building, but they don't have a rug at the entrance. And then you've shifted the topic. Thinking of frameworks that are all related is very, very helpful. And one way that you can train yourself to do this is, one, be familiar with a lot of topics. You don't have to be an expert, okay? You don't have to be an expert in laminar flow just as much as you are about baking cakes. You don't have to be an expert, but dabbling in a few things, becoming like a jack of trades in a sense, but with knowledge, not necessarily with actually doing. Although if you actually do it, it's a lot easier to think in frameworks for that topic. But if you are able to dabble in a lot of different things, and YouTube is great for this, you can learn a lot of different topics and you can start connecting those together. So if you have a fascination with finances, you can start to do a little bit with tax knowledge, a little bit with depreciation knowledge, a little bit with the market today, a little bit with investing. All of those are connected and easy to make into a framework. But for your English, one way that you need to study for it is by two, you need to be studying the related words. You need to be studying vocabulary and their synonyms. And we've talked a lot about that in this video up here. We go into depth actually with how to really study those synonyms and to just connect things together. And that will also help you with thinking in frameworks and being able to move from topic to topic to topic, finding a related bridge. Vocabulary for me personally is one of the ways that I was able to jump from topic to topic to topic in Mandarin.
The fourth way to speak while thinking is to ask questions. People generally tend to be okay with you asking them about their opinions, of asking them about what they believe, because they like to add value to the conversation. So if you are stuck somewhere, you don't know what to talk about with the weather, ask them a question about their plans or their contingency plan for the upcoming event. If you push the conversation back onto them, one, you get more information from them.
Yes.
So that's great because then you can respond back in several ways from that response. But number two, and probably most importantly, it just gives you time to think.
Yeah.
So while they're speaking, you can be thinking not only about what they're saying, but also about what you're going to say, perhaps even at the same time. This gives you time to think while having a conversation. It's an incredible, difficult skill to master, and just asking a really good, pointed question can be a good way to give you a little bit more time.
How do you think of these questions? I know for some students, or if you are an introvert in personality, it's kind of difficult to think of questions because you don't really want to know, or you don't care as much. And so thinking of some small talk questions that you can add to your repertoire of things to pull from and be able to use, but also thinking of some pointed questions with, okay, I don't know anything about that topic. You can ask them more about, well, how did you get started? Or how do you know so much about this? Or how much do you do this? Or how often do you do this? Those are very basic questions, and you can apply them, rinse and repeat to all kinds of topics. Josh is actually known in our circles as the question guy, because he's very good at asking all kinds of questions. He's just naturally curious about these things. But he also spends a lot of time just learning a little bit about all these different topics so that he can ask more educated questions. You don't have to be a master at this. You really don't. But again, dabbling in these little things will help you be able to ask more specific questions. Josh just said something about listening and speaking, like thinking about a response while you listen to their response. That is incredibly difficult. And if you are an intermediate speaker, you are probably not there yet. Don't worry, it will come. As you practice and as you really dive into English, that will come. For now, it might be difficult as an intermediate. If you're advanced, you should be working on that skill. That should be something that you are actively developing.
Another thing with this, though, if you are taking a standardized test, one of the greatest things you can do is to be inquisitive, is to be asking questions from a lot of different contexts. That means exposing yourself to a lot of different contexts, but that also means even when you're listening to a video like this one right now, ask yourself questions that you could then follow up with this video. If you were sitting in the room with us, what would you ask us? If you were sitting in the room with a pilot, what would you ask them? Go out and pursue those questions so that when you do meet a real pilot or you do meet a real plumber, what are the questions you would ask them? And some of those questions are probably going to sound a little basic, but the more deeply you investigate, the more you can ask questions that are very specific to that context. I've been told before that, like, wow, I didn't know Josh had so much knowledge about programming. And I don't, actually. I don't have a lot of knowledge in programming, but I was able to ask questions that I received from listening to other people talk about programming. So I remember hearing them say this phrase, or I remember hearing them say this thing, and I don't know what that is. So now I'm going to bring this over from that context from years ago, and I'm going to bring it to bear on this conversation to see what this person can do to explain it to me. So keep those questions, keep the curiosity, and you will find that you can use them even in context years down the road.
Creating a spider web of knowledge, basically,
Yeah.
from which to go on, and you can expand it. Every person you meet is going to teach you something, whether something you want to be or you don't want to be, or something that you want to know or not. Conversation is a great way to grow understanding. Now, one thing I also want to say too is a lot of standardized tests focus on science topics in the reading or in the lectures. If you want to perform well on those, make a habit of watching things like SciShow on YouTube or Smarter Every Day or Mark Rober. Take some time to watch some of these videos because that's science in English and it's brought down to a layman's level so that hopefully you can start learning and exploring some of these opportunities to understand English and keywords and phrases so that when you take that test, you'll already be familiar with so many of these terms. And it won't be like I've never heard of laminar flow before. I'm listening to this lecture about laminar flow. I don't know what it is, so I've got to kind of make up ways to get through the response on that test. So again, studying these topics is very helpful to standardized exams as well.
The fifth and final tip today for thinking while speaking is to simply tell the person, I'll get back to you. This is a very strange way to think about how to give a response to a person while you're still trying to think. But sometimes the thinking part is very important. You don't need to just be talking and not using the thing up here, the thing between your ears. So sometimes if they give you a stumper, they ask you a really difficult question, you can't respond to it. You want to be using quality information. So if you have the time and it's not on a standardized test where you have to give a response in a certain amount of time and it's big pressure, if it's between you and a colleague, you ought to feel very welcome to tell that person, hey, I don't know. I really don't. Let me get back to you on that.
And this is perfectly appropriate, especially in contexts where you don't want to answer with fluff or you don't want to pretend that you know when you really don't. Again, Americans are generally okay with you not knowing something. Just be honest about it. If they ask you a question and you don't know it, just say, I don't know. That's another thing too. You don't have to think on your feet of lies to tell. You don't have to think on your feet of ways to just make yourself seem like you understand and can relate to them. If you can't, then you can't, and that's okay. This culture really prizes honesty in a lot of ways. So for you, even if it's something that's seemingly very simple, it's okay if you don't know. You can say that. And if it's something that's very important, like a work thing or something to do with a relationship that you have with somebody that you really want to keep and foster and maintain, then it's okay to say, I don't know about that actually. Give me some time to think about that and I'll circle back to you. That's totally fine.
Thank you guys so much for listening while we speak. And we hope that this video is a great thing for you to be able to use different strategies just so that you can begin that process as an advanced English speaker or as even a close to fluent English speaker, so you can be able to express yourself while also being able to not be held back by the skill of listening, to be able to do both of those hand in hand, because that is extremely difficult.
For sure. All right, guys, thank you so much. We'll catch you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.